say that maybe producer responsibility, extended producer responsibility might be, as before, a legislative approach. And so Matt Prindiville will talk about the kinds of thinking and work that upstream has done. Matt?
Thank you, Jerry. Well, thanks so much for being here, folks. And I just want to thank Jerry and Dan and Dylan and all the my friends at Resource Recycling for inviting me to be here with all of you today. I'm going to start by telling you a little bit about myself and why I believe this issue of extended producer responsibility is so important and timely today. So I grew up in a little fishing town called Gloucester, Massachusetts, which is about an hour north of Boston. And in growing up, most of my buddies' dads were fishermen. In the late 70s and early 80s, when I was a little kid, these families were doing great. And all of a sudden, the cod fishery collapsed out in Georgia's Bank. And these families were suddenly left without much of a future. And I can remember when our neighbors lost their house, and I can remember the shame on their faces. I can remember firsthand that experience of pain and suffering, what happens when we lose a part of the natural world and we lose an economy that's dependent on it. And for me, that experience stayed with me. When I went to college, I would eventually change my major from creative writing to environmental policy. And I first heard about this idea of extended producer responsibility in a college classroom where I was reading Paul Hawken's The Ecology of Commerce. Some of you have probably read this book. It's an incredible piece. And Hawken was describing an economy where companies design products with safe, sustainable materials, they produce them with renewable energy, and then they steward these products to become the next generation of products after we're finished with them. And it was such a powerful idea. And in that idea, I kind of felt the seeds of a revolution kind of stirring inside of me, and the seeds of what would eventually become my life's work. And I've spent about most of the last 15 years working to build out this vision of a circular economy here in the United States. Which brings me to today and the topic of extended producer responsibility for packaging. And for us, for those of us at Upstream, there's really a clear rationale for why we need some form of EPR for packaging, and it stems from shared values around wanting to steward all of the natural resources and energy on this planet. It comes from these shared collective values of stewarding this beautiful planet that we live on. And so everybody, from recycling coordinators in local governments to packaging suppliers to consumer brands to waste and recycling businesses, everybody wants to boost recycling and prevent litter, right? It's embarrassing that our country throws away over half of the generated packaging materials. And when you look at plastics, when we're throwing away nearly 90% of the materials that we generate for packaging, it's a huge problem. And of course, now we know that a lot of these plastics are winding up in our lakes, rivers, streams, and waterways, and eventually making their way out to the ocean. There's been some recent comprehensive studies that have been done that are estimating that we put about 8 million tons of plastic into the oceans every single year. Just to put that in perspective, it's about the equivalent of 5 plastic shopping bags full of plastic garbage for every foot of coastline in the world. And of course, what happens when these plastics get into the oceans is that they shred into all these microplastic particles, and everything in the ocean starts eating it. This is from a recent voyage that I went through the Bermuda Triangle, looking for plastic in the gyre, and everywhere we went, every single trawl that we did, we found thousands upon thousands of these little plastic fragments floating on the surface. And what's worse is that the longer these particles spend time at sea, they begin to start soaking up toxic chemicals. All the DDT and PCBs and flame retardants that we've pumped into the environment over the last 50 or 60 years are making their way onto these plastics, and researchers now believe that plastic pollution is a major vector for how toxic chemicals get into the marine food chain and eventually get into us. So none of us want this to happen. We all want to fix these problems, and the good news is that we know how to do this, right? There's been numerous reports issued from some of the top recycling firms and research firms in the U.S. I see some of the folks writing those reports in this audience. We know how to boost recycling and prevent litter. There's a bunch of policies that people have identified for how to do that. universal cart-based curbside recycling, pay-as-you-throw, investments in MRFs, away-from-home infrastructure, outreach and education, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the good news. The bad news is that many of these ideas cost money. And unfortunately, in the system we have in the US right now, you've got a situation where local governments are either unwilling or unable to invest in recycling and litter prevention. And a big part of that is because they have competing costs, right? Recycling and litter prevention that competes with roads and schools and other essential municipal services. And then looking at the waste management and recycling industry, they're only going to invest. I mean, these folks are in all of you are in the business. You're in business. You're not providing the service for free. So they're only going to invest if that investment is clearly going to improve their bottom line. And typically, recycling industry, you need inked contracts with local governments to do that. And these are the same parties that are either unwilling or unable to invest in recycling and litter prevention. So you've got this vicious cycle that we somehow need to break out of. And a big part of why local governments are unwilling to invest in recycling is because with the exception of a handful of commodities like aluminum, most of the other materials, it costs more to collect them than you get from selling the scrap materials. Now this slide is from some friends of ours at Stewardship Ontario, which runs a quasi-EPR program for Ontario, where the local governments pay half the cost for recycling and the consumer goods companies pay the other half. And so, because nobody wants to pay more than their fair share, the data has to be impeccable. And so, as you can see, aluminum is the only material with positive value, and the plastics are the worst. And this includes HDPE and PET plastic as well. So, the bottom line is that if you want to boost recycling and prevent litter, that somebody is going to have to pick up the tab. And increasingly, people are looking to extended producer responsibility as a way to get the consumer goods companies that make these decisions and put all this packaging out there in the marketplace to help pay their fair share for sustainably managing it. I'm going to go just real quick history about where we were, where we are, and where we may be headed. EPR for packaging has its roots in the refundable container deposit idea, which was started by the beverage industry in the early 1900s. Most of you guys know this. Back then, these guys wanted to get their very expensive glass bottles back. So they said, hey, let's put a deposit on it, and sure enough, it was very successful. And so when the beverage industry changed their business model to single-serve one-way containers, they said, no, we don't need our bottles back anymore. That's your problem. And of course, people started seeing them on the side of the road, and a bunch of activists got together in the 70s and said, enough is enough, we want the deposits back. And basically, the beverage industry has been fighting them ever since. And so you can imagine, and they've been quite successful at it, I should add as well. And so you can imagine my surprise when a beverage industry and a bottled water company at that, Nestle Waters North America, came out in 2011 and said, we're going to support extended producer responsibility for packaging. You wouldn't believe my phone was like ringing off the hook for days. People were asking me, what does this mean, Matt? What does this mean? Is this good? Is this bad? And at the time, I thought it was very, very bad. But looking back, I have to say that I think this was a bit of a watershed moment, because it was really the first time that I know of in the United States where a major consumer goods company stood forward and said, you know what? We actually should be responsible for collecting and recycling our packaging. And actually, we think the rest of the consumer goods companies should also share that same responsibility. So again, to sum up about 5 years of history in 30 seconds, we started working with Nestle Waters and with a number of environmental groups like the Natural Resources Defense Council, Clean Water Action, Conservation Law Foundation, and a number of local governments in a handful of states. So we worked on bills in Rhode Island, Minnesota, California, and to a lesser extent, North Carolina. Really putting these ideas out there, and what we quickly found out is that the consumer goods companies, with the exception of Nestle Waters and their trade associations, were a force to be reckoned with. As all of you that work in public policy know that this is obviously the case. And they formed an alliance with the state and regional business associations, so the state chambers of commerce, the retailers association, et cetera, and formed quite a political juggernaut in opposition to this idea gaining any traction. And so we knew that if we were going to make anything happen, we had to grow a big tent coalition with people that mattered to policymakers. So we set about to do that, and in the spring of 2014, we're really working on our second round of legislation in a couple of different states. We organized a forum which had businesses, it had local and state governments, it had folks from the waste and recycling industry. And what we quickly found out is that the bedrock partners that we needed to move this issue forward, namely local governments and the waste and recycling industry, were not there. And so we went back to the drawing board. And in the summer of 2014, we organized two national dialogues. We did one with local governments first, and the second with folks in the waste and recycling industry. And we really wanted to understand, what it was that people wanted to get out of extended producer responsibility. What were they hoping to get out of investing in a system like this? And also, what were their concerns? What were the roadblocks and obstacles to supporting extended producer responsibility? So when we asked local governments this question, for them, the main reasons for why they would want some form of EPR, first of all, revolve around, and these are ranked, I should ask, revolve around shifting some or all of the costs for collecting and recycling upstream to producers. This feeling of the burden of having to shoulder the costs of recycling and having to try to figure out how to pay for it, especially when commodities markets start to fail. Wanting significant increases in recycling rates, wanting a system that's doing better than what a lot of these folks have been able to do with limited resources, wanting to ensure that the oversight remains in the hands of government, so not wanting the foxes to guard the henhouse, so to speak, looking for improvements in packaging design. And the last two are really important. I think that they really wanted brand owners and consumer goods companies to be partners in market development, finding the markets for all the packaging that they put out there, and investing in the MRFs to ensure that they can handle the volume of materials and all the different types of materials. And then finally, really looking for a partnership in getting robust outreach and education out there. The budgets that local and state governments have for outreach and education on these issues is infinitesimal. And so, they would kill for some of the marketing budgets that these big companies have. So that was a big one. And then, of course, harmonizing these efforts across jurisdictions. So you've got you're collecting the same types of materials in the same types of way from one town to the next, from one public space to the next. Make it easy for people to recycle. Recycling businesses, you'll see a lot of the same themes here as well. Wanting to optimize the system, wanting sustainable funding and investment in recycling. Just like their local governments, they want to see increased recycling rates and system performance. And then, this is a big one, design innovation. Wanting to have that feedback loop coming from the waste end to the production end so that the consumer goods companies are designing for bale value so that all the recyclers can actually make money when they get their hands on these materials at the end. When you look at the concerns for these parties, again, the big concern is too much producer control from local governments. I think all eyes were on the 100% producer financed and producer controlled system being rolled out in British Columbia. And I think there's some concern from local governments that producers may dictate how they want their programs run. That local governments who've been working to bring up community values, that some of those community values would get lost in that type of a system. So, one of the ways to counteract that is to make sure that local governments in the waste and recycling industry are involved in the planning and management for these types of initiatives. Some big concerns about costs being pushed downstream, certainly not wanting to have any stranded assets in all this. And also, as I mentioned, some concerns about preempting local government action, that local governments won't be able to run their programs the way that they want to. I'm going to skip over the last one and go on to the recycling businesses. Again, look at number one, right? It's the top concern for both parties. Too much control by brand owners, and I think this is a concern, especially for waste and recycling businesses that have built their business models on certain kinds of assumptions. And EPR, when we have producers involved, you begin to shuffle the deck for how those business relationships change, and that can be very concerning to folks that have built businesses over the last 30, 40 years. Perverse incentives, unintended consequences. You've got a good piece of environmental legislation, but how it gets rolled out may have a detrimental impact on their business. and structural concerns, really wanting whatever gets created to work with the existing infrastructure and not supplant it. And finally, this last one was interesting to me. There was some frank conversations about political viability and really, wondering if we could even have anything like this in the United States. We're not Germany. This is not the EU. You've got a lot of people that think that Europe and Canada are socialist countries. And so, is this even possible? So to boil it all down, basically the debates over the last 5 years have revolved down to money and control. And so everybody wants the money, right? All the local governments and waste recycling companies and the end users, everybody wants the money that would come from producer fees to help optimize the recycling systems where they operate. But nobody wants to give up control over their part of the system. And that's really what it comes down to. And so, to that regard, some form of shared responsibility for packaging may be the political viable route forward. And so I'm going to breeze through our bill here since I'm running out of time. But we wanted to introduce a bill to basically keep this conversation going. And so it's on our website, upstreampolicy.org. We're not wedded to the bill idea, but we wanted to take this concept of shared responsibility, play with it a little bit, put it out there, and begin to kind of see what kind of conversations we could have so we can evolve this policy here in the United States. So what the bill does is it creates a sustainable packaging trust to receive monies from consumer brands that put packaging into the market. And that trust would be used toward achieving a 75% recycling rate. And also, we don't just say, one big recycling rate. We also suggest that there be rulemaking to determine individual commodity targets as well, so that we're increasing performance for all the different commodity types, not just having one subsidize another. Now, this trust would be administered by a sustainable packaging authority, which would be, and again, if you live in a state which has a waste management authority, this could be added to the list of responsibilities for that authority. So the authority would be governed by basically business interests up and down the supply chain, as well as some statewide environmental groups to help balance things out for the public's interest. And the authority would use the trust basically to invest in proven strategies to boost recycling and prevent litter. So I won't go into all of them here, but it's things that you guys all know. It's infrastructure, away from home infrastructure, MRF infrastructure, litter, capturing plastics out of the environment, all the different ideas that was outlined in an earlier slide. That's what the trust would use these funds for. So just real quickly, the ABCs of the bill creates a trust to receive producer funds. The funds are managed by a diverse group of stakeholders. They're invested in proven strategies to boost recycling and prevent litter. And I'm just going to close by saying this. We like to say that 2014 was the year that corporate America got its wake-up call on recycling with the announcement of the Closed Loop Fund and the Recycling Partnership. And let me start off by saying that these are very good developments. I want to say that. Some of you have read my criticism of these pieces, but these are good initiatives, and we are very glad that they're there. Now, that being said, from our perspective, getting communities to transition from dual stream to single stream, or making some targeted investments in MRFs, these aren't game changer types of solutions. And so from our perspective, if we were to just to leave it at this and walk away, we feel we'd be doing a disservice to the country. So we feel that right now, there is this opportunity that's out there. And because corporate America has admitted that they bear some responsibility for helping to collect and recycle packaging and ensure that it doesn't end up in the oceans, it's really up to local governments, it's up to NGOs, it's up to a lesser extent the waste and recycling industry to determine how much responsibility these companies should bear and how that responsibility should get implemented. And my last thing here is I'm 3 minutes over, I apologize to resource recycling. Don't waste this opportunity. Consumer brands have a lot on their plate. They're being banged over the head on climate change, on all kinds of different issues, palm oil in Indonesia. So, without sustained pressure, they're going to turn attention somewhere else. And so what I hope is that recycling advocates, all the people in this room, can get together and figure out what kind of model for extended producer responsibility is going to work here in the United States. Let's test it out in a couple of states. Let's learn. Let's build on that. Let's expand it throughout the country, and let's lay the foundation for a circular economy here in the U.S. So thank you very much, folks. It's been my real pleasure to be here. I look forward to the question and answer.
By the way, the Closed Loop Fund, as well as Recycling Partnership, our topics, their programs are described on our topics in other sessions at this conference. The final speaker can give us more of an industry perspective of it. It is different after some 25 years of experience in EPR, that industry has a different European approach because of that long involved history. And then here, what do you think? Last 4 or 5 years is